Welcome to the NEREJ NYREJ Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. And my guest today is Deborah Smith, and she is with the CenterCap group. And Deborah, tell me a little bit of your story on how you got to where you are today, because it's a very interesting story as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Rick. And first of all, thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate being here. And if my story serves any inspiration to folks that listen, that anything is achievable once one puts their mind to it, I hope they are similarly inspired by my story. I grew up in Australia on a dairy farmer, so I'm a dairy farmer's daughter. And I didn't have real ambitions of going to college until I did, which was very late in my high school years. And I was able to get into University of Sydney. I did a double degree. I was fortunate to get a position with Morgan Stanley after I graduated. I spent some time in Australia, and then they shipped me over to the US. And I have been here several years later, a few banks later, and now we have our own business. We began it out of the GFC, and I think today we're probably the only female-led investment bank in the middle market real estate space. And I'm happy and proud of what we've achieved.
Well, it's an interesting story. And before we start on the meat of the story, I want to ask a little bit about growing up in Australia and a dairy farm. That's a little different as well. And then changing over. Where was the turning point there?
Yeah, so look, I grew up milking cows, twice a day before and after school. Most of my upbringing right into my later high school years, actually. And so we moved around a lot as well when I was a kid, and there wasn't a particular strong emphasis placed on education at all. And then I just happened to move to a town that had a school where it was more focused on education. And I had a very, very fortunate experience that I had a great teacher when I was in the 11th grade. He said, maybe you should think about going to university, something that never would have crossed my mind ever. And so that was kind of a turning point. And I was lucky to have those shepherds that helped me get through the applications and got me focused in a direction and helped me consider that as an alternative. And so the rest is history. I was able to get into University of Sydney. I worked hard. It was quite a challenge, I will admit, since I didn't come from a background that was particularly polished or upscale. And so had to kind of do it the hard way, made a few mistakes, a few little trips along the way. And then I applied into Morgan Stanley. I was going to be a tax lawyer, but I ended up applying into Morgan Stanley, and I was fortunate that they accepted me. And part of my initial stint with Morgan Stanley is that I come to the US for a year. And I was fortunate that I came over. I had a really awesome experience working in the energy space, power utilities, when I came over. I did a good job. I must have done a good job because they promoted me to a third year, and then they promoted me again through their ACP program. And so I decided to stay. And so I never in a million years would have thought growing up that this is where I would be in a million years. But nonetheless, it's like I follow the breadcrumbs on the little yellow brick road, and somehow they led me here.
And obviously you must enjoy living here.
I do. I do. I love it here. I was just back in Australia in February this year, and I really enjoyed my time back home. But, I've become accustomed to being in the United States here. And after moving around so much as a child, I really don't like moving anymore. I think I'd like to be in the same house and pretty much stay there.
Now that could have happened after COVID, because a lot of people went in that direction as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you started this company how long ago?
I think this year's our 16th year, actually.
Oh, wow.
Almost 16 years. Yeah, time flies. We're all older. I
Yeah.
definitely feel older. I could run a lot more miles in 2009 than I can run now. So I'm an avid runner. Now it's a little harder than it used to be.
Oh, maybe we'll see it here in Boston at the next week's marathon.
Yeah, that's a little too competitive for me. It's a
Okay.
little competitive.
So let's talk about what you see going on in the industry right now. I mean, you talk about a lot of the consolidation that's going on. Is that becoming a problem or is that a good thing?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a regeneration cycle, is what I would call it. I think the industry is going through a lot of changes, some of them driven by new entrants into the space, and some of it driven by changes in models in trying to facilitate how you get access to return. And I think probably what's underlying a little bit is over time, the role of technology has really changed. And it's with information being free, you can get it anywhere. It's what you do with it and how you use it that is what's creating opportunities. So whether that translates into I have to get closer to the asset, so I need to have more of an operating inspired model. Whether I've got to have the play between diversified vehicles and niche product vehicles is one in somewhat about having operations. And then what you see is new people, and that's all addressing product, what you're doing on the product side. But then you've got the distribution side, where as the market again becomes more efficient and you have more capital going towards a smaller group of players, it's how to distinguish yourself and how do you find capital to continue growing. And capital is the lifeblood of every organization, right? You can't grow if you don't have the capital to do it. And so I think there's a chase for distribution. So between distribution and product, and then you can throw in geography, that's what's in totality driving driving consolidation. So you're seeing folks either looking to acquire in those across one of those angles in order to continue growing their business. It's very interesting because if you throw in what's going on there's a growing number of infrastructure players that are coming into our space. You have a greater number of insurance companies looking to get into third-party investment management. So some of these too are structural changes that are impacting the industry as well. And so, if in markets when you have to get bigger in order to survive, how do you go about doing that? And I think that ends up what's driving it.
Now, what about you talk about all the changes in the market, and some of that has to do with how our government changes hands every 4 to 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously right now we're in kind of a major change. How is that affecting things?
Well, I think the most interesting thing we're seeing now, which may play into, what's going on in some of these trends, is the role of high net worth and retail capital. And, particularly if you're looking at the DST market, you're looking at the 1031 market, those are particularly sensitive to switches in government because it can impact the tax rules. And I think one trend we are seeing in real estate now is an increasing desire to be or to have access to retail capital. So if you're an owner, operator, or manager, or fund manager, which folks have always thought that institutional capital was the holy grail. And I think what we're realizing is that there's an entire market out there, a huge addressable market, which is retail capital and family office capital, RIA capital, broker deals, all of this whole segment that I think has garnered an increasing amount of attention and is now looked at as a way of expanding your distribution. So instead of just chasing institutions, why not switch it up and focus on this angle? But the challenge is how do you build it in scale? And how do you get access to the network and the relationships if you're starting from scratch?
Well, access to the network, that seems like a easy piece. The way I look at things is because if you go to someone that's you created a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
they usually can introduce you into that arena. And it's all about relationships. overall.
I 100% agree. It's where capital is the lifeblood of these organizations, that is true, but behind the capital is relationships. And I think, I've worked a lot of different industries in my career, and I would say real estate stands out as one of those industry which is very heavily relationship driven. And it's interesting for us as a firm, because I've been in the industry for over 20 years now, is to see the progression of people as we move through the industry. And as an aside, I every time I do a Teams meeting now, I must be getting nostalgic in my old age, because I look at someone, I says, oh my gosh, I've known this person for 20 years. It's like, it's a really long time. But you never, when you first meet folks, I look back when I first got in, and one of my earlier deals was on the Gables go private. And that seems so long ago now. It was all the way back in '05. It seems so long ago, but it is relationship driven for sure. You can get a call if you can get someone to give you a warm intro. It definitely will save you 2 years of an alternative way.
Right. So,
Yeah.
you were just talking about how some of the people that you're running in been in 20 years. And do you see young people getting into this?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like I find similarly with the growing of the God is in some ways mirrors what's going on in the regenerative aspect of the industry in general. So my comments will apply equally to corporates as they do to in-house talent, is that what happens is companies grow, they get bigger and bigger, and then they sell out to someone else. If you're not a buyer, you're a seller. If you're not a seller, you're a buyer. And then you lean down, and those big guys lean into the mid-sized tier firms in order to gain scale. So then you're left with the small firms. The small firms have to fight their way in order to rise to the top. And then eventually the bigger guys either break up, or leaders in those organizations spin out and they start all over again. And so the cycle regenerates. In some ways, I see the same with the talent pool. And what's interesting about that is that you don't have to, for many, many organizations in real estate, you do not have to look far within the organization to see the owner, the founder, a relative, a successor that's family member in many, many, many organizations, many. And I still see a lot of those, God, but there is an increasing of talent. There's lots of people coming into the industry and lots of people progressing through the industry. It just takes time, because it's also one of those sectors that you've got to been around. You have to put in your time to get the experience in the seasoning in this space. A lot of people have made fortunes in real estate, and a lot of them have lost them.
Well, you say that in your time, and young people today they don't think they have the time, because they think they go in a week's training, they're ready for the world, and pay me $500,000 a year.
It's impatience. It's impatience.
So has it been very difficult to find young people to want to?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the changing of the talent that's coming in today is that they grew up in a generation, more so now, where of the internet and electronics, and now we have ChatGPT and Copilot, and 10 other versions of tools that can help skip the line on getting access to information. And I think part of the challenge with doing that is you run the danger of skipping the learning process, right? You skip the process, and it's really the process is the only thing that's really important. And if you take away all of that, and the way the last generation was raised with pen and paper and some computers, but you actually had to go to a library, and you had to read books, and you had to research information, because there was no access to any of these resources. And through that process, the process of learning is different, right? Because you have to get good at taking massive amounts of information and figuring out what to do with it. And if you think through the relationship between technology today and professionals, particularly in my industry, the difference between them is your ability to synthesize and to take information, know what to do with it, and have good judgment and make good decisions around it. And for folks that are relying on technological sources to skip the process, end up falling short because they've shortchanged that process, thinking it doesn't matter, and they just need to get to the answer. And sometimes, through your learning process, particularly in younger years, it isn't always about the answer, it's the process you go through to get to it.
Yeah, because I think that young people today, if there's enough technology in the industry, that gets them excited. Like you were saying, the paper and the pen, that doesn't interest them anymore. And this is going through all sectors of the industry, commercial real estate, commercial construction, any of that. If there isn't any kind of technology in place, that doesn't hold their interest. So what you're saying that you have all this new technology, and now we have we step above is AI
Mm-hmm.
technology,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
know is going into your industry pretty heavily right now. You want to talk a little bit about how that's affecting things?
Yeah, so on the one hand, as a general statement, I actually think real estate is a dinosaur when it comes to embracing technology as a rule, as a general statement. And folks may disagree, but having worked in the prop tech space in real estate and have worked on a couple of opportunities, I think the industry's had a harder time embracing it in a material way, in ways that is transformative, that is changing the fundamental way we're doing things. I'm not talking about chipping away at apps or things like that. I'm talking about fundamental changes to the way we do business. And I think real estate has a harder time with that. And in part that may be because there's so much of an older generation that actually, could look at a piece of dirt and say, well, gee, I can get this out of this piece of dirt and make calls based on their history and based on their experience and on the job training. So I think there's some of that, but I still think there are tools that are used from a business perspective that folks in particularly in my space use. And I think if they're used in ways to help you to outperform as opposed to help you do your job, then I think they can be very, very helpful. I appreciate the value that AI brings to the table, and I certainly appreciate that if I want to know, how many golf balls there are in the US, then I can type that in and get a reasonable approach to that. But it's only so helpful to me in doing what I need to do because clients retain us and hire us for our judgment calls, what to do with that information as opposed to the information itself.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're talking about because I know some commercial real estate property owners that have been in the
Mm-hmm.
industry for, I don't know, I'd say 80 years,
Yep.
75, 80 years. They own this big commercial. Some of them don't even have emails.
Yep.
They don't use
I know
email.
people too.
So I understand what you're saying, but they're very successful. They made billions of dollars and they don't, yeah, I mean, what do I need that for? I can understand that, but
Yeah. Yeah. So, but like it's a process, right? So I think black and white answers and generalizations are harder to make because that's where we started this is I think the industry is going through change. And we're seeing some really interesting, innovative ways of looking at housing and, looking at improving cold storage and industrial, all these things that are starting to chip away. And as a firm, I, I'm part of that generation where I really appreciate the innovation that these things and these technologies can make. But I'm talking the disruptive variety is that I really appreciate the movement and the folks that are coming into the industry that are looking to disrupt the industry. And I think the biggest challenge they end up having is their tech people, their engineers, or their folks from outside of the space. And it's harder to integrate that into real estate unless you learn to bring together real estate with the technology. If you try and take one without the other and think you can do it without the other, I think you set your set up for failure.
yeah, and I agree with you. And the Northeast is probably the most difficult to bring technology
Mm-hmm.
into. The rest of the country, I think, is so much further ahead of us. We're starting to catch up now. Uh,
Yeah.
we owe the people, like I said, a lot of the people that have owned a lot of the big real estate companies in the Northeast are old timers. Not
Hmm.
that that's a bad thing because I'm not a kid myself. So yeah, but you have to start embracing some of the technology that's coming into the market because otherwise, you're going to be left behind at some point. I, I
Eventually, yeah. I mean, as the generations change, you would anticipate that. It's the problem when it's a relationship based business and you have an older generation that it controls a lot of it, and new folks are coming up to the ranks, and over time these things will change. And I think it's well, thank God fax machines aren't around anymore. I mean, who uses a fax machine? But it's like things are slowly evolving. I just think and I think it's a lot easier to chip away at the edges than it is to make disruptive change. And it's the disruptive change that I think is more interesting because I think things are due. I think there's some very, very smart people in this world that from the tech space, that are from an engineering space, even the marketing spaces, that can really bring revolutionary change to how we do things and be more efficient and be more creative and deliver a better product cheaper that lasts longer. And I think that the challenging too is that it requires the operating side or the builder side, the developer side, to actually want to engage and take a bet, and to put themselves out there. And it's hard to do that when so many of the really successful ones have been successful without it.
well, I think also if you don't have that, your returns are starting to be changing from what they were years
Mhm.
ago. And I think the technology helps you with your returns as far as them dropping somewhat. Uh,
Yeah.
it makes it a little more manageable, a little more efficient. Um, but I could be wrong because I have been wrong before. So,
Yeah. Well, look, I really like things on the housing side, particularly, is that I like 3D printing of homes, and I like integrating machine technology more into the manufactured housing space because I think machinery can do it better, cheaper, last longer. I really like some of the innovations there. I like, even cold storage, making it more mechanical on retrieval systems. And on the operations side is another space I think is really interesting. But, but folks, and I actually think part of what is inspired or pushed or accelerated, to the extent we can see accelerated, the involvement of technology is through COVID, when there was a lack of access to labor and there was an inability to have people on site and to do things, that they become and say, well, how are we going to get this done? There was a lean in to more technology, to look for a technological solution. And so I think some of those changes, I hope they're here to stay, and they continue to catalyze development over time.
well, I think so as well. And I think we covered quite a bit. So I think we can probably go now.
Okay.
But and then we can regroup at another time and have you back again.
That would be
When things
terrific.
change again, because we know
They're
that
always changing. They're always
yeah, in this
changing.
industry, everything's always changing. So I think that's a good segue to move to the next step. But I do appreciate you coming on, Deborah. Um, I do find it very interesting how things have changed and the consolidation is taking effect.
Yep. It's very much alive and well.
Yeah.
Alive and well. Yeah. We're going to have, for as a firm, we're going to have a very busy year this year. And again, it's particularly when the markets become challenging, I think is when real estate, there are always winners and losers, but that potential and that opportunity is there, more often than not when there's chaos and uncertainty. As long as there's liquidity, then I think it's a real opportunity to shine. So I expect to continue to see more consolidation as folks look to expand product and distribution. And I think this is going to be a very strong year, and we'll see some changes.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, one thing that I have to say about the industry is that it's very resilient. And the
Yep.
people that are in it, they always coming up with new ways,
Yep.
and always getting through the tough times. Yeah, there'll be a bunch that they fall through the cracks because they're not as well prepared for things,
Yep.
but the
I
people
agree.
have been around, yeah.
Yeah.
And
See,
they
Rick,
do.
we're on
They
the
do.
same page. Look where we ended. We're on the same page.
That's right. On the same page. I like that. Well, thank you again, Deborah. We're talking with Deborah Smith, and she's with the CenterCap group. And before we leave, I
Sure.
promised a friend of mine that
Mhm.
I would give him a quick plug, and maybe you have been at his place. You ever go to Broad Nosh?
No.
Oh, it's a bagel restaurant in New York City. He has like four different locations.
Uh-huh.
And he has like, I don't know, 25, 30 different types of cream cheeses for his bagels.
Wow.
It's a great place if you're ever in the area. I'm not familiar with the streets in New York, but I can tell you, you look it up. It's one of the top rated restaurants in New York.
Well, this, Rick, while you're on that plug, what we're going to do is when we both can coordinate schedules or in New York at the same time, we're going to go there and try one out.
All
And
right.
then we'll report back to the listeners.
That's right. Hey, it's always good to talk business over a nice bagel and cream cheese.
Of course. Of course.
And
I
you're in
look
New
forward to it.
York. And when you're in New York,
Exactly.
you have to have a bagel and cream cheese.
That's
So,
exactly what you got to do.
yeah,
Sounds like a
check out
plan.
Broad Nosh.
You got it.
Thank you, Deborah. We're talking again. We're talking with Deborah Smith. She is from the CenterCap group in New York. And
Mhm.
it was a pleasure speaking with you, Deborah.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
And we are listening to the NEREJ NYREJ podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Until next time.